Ford Escort, Ford Escort, Ford EXP, and Mazda 323. Mazda 323 asks, why is there Mazda on one of Ford Escort lineup?
And why is he here? He lost.
Well, technically it isn't one of Ford Escort lineup, but a predecessor of it in some market. We shall explain it in this video. The history of Ford Laser dated back to the early 1970s Ford Escort. The Mark I Ford Escort entered the Australian market in early 1970s and was produced by Ford Australia in Homebush plant from 1970 to 1975 as a two-door or four-door saloon and also as a two-door panel van. The 1.1 and 1.3 litre version were offered, as was the 1.5 twin cam unit with local sourcing, bringing the Australian content of the vehicle to 85%. In 1975, and it was also being assembled in Seaview Ford New Zealand plant in Lower Hutt, where they built the 1.1 and 1.3 litre version. The Mark I Escort was also sold in Japan, imported from the United Kingdom by Kintetsu Motors, and was available with a 1.3 litre engine in GT trims and was sold alongside the Ford Cortina and the Ford Capri. Only the four-door saloon was offered, and this was the only generation available to Japanese buyers. The engine displacement contributed to a lower annual road tax obligation to Japanese buyers, which helped sales. The Mark II Escort was assembled at Ford Australia Homebush plant in Sydney from 1975 to 1980 in two-door and four-door saloon. Two-door panel van forms and the estate version were unavailable to the Australian market. The Mark II Escort was also introduced to New Zealand in early 1975, assembled at Ford Seaview plant in Lower Hutt. Unlike the Australian models, the New Zealand Escort range followed the specification of British models, aside from the use of metric instrumentation. All body styles were assembled, including the estate, previously in Mark I body, are built out import from the United Kingdom. After the era of the Ford Cortina, which was still rear-wheel drive, ended, and as the market lay empty after the Ford Escort departure from the Oceanian and Asian market, Ford immediately tried to find a new model to fill their small subcompact market. They partnered up with Mazda to fill the gap that were already empty. Mazda's financial difficulties during the 1960s resulted in a new corporate investor, Ford Motor Company. Ford had bought 25% of Mazda's shares in 1979, which allowed Ford to sell several cars under the Ford brand. During the 1980s, Ford gained another 20% financial stake. These include large and small amounts in all areas of automotive landscape, most notably in the realm of pickup truck, such as the Mazda B series, which spawned a Ford Courier for the North American market. Ford Asia then replaced the Cortina with the Ford Laser, which was a rebranding of Mazda 323. The introduction of Ford Laser in 1981 was a major change in Ford product lineup for the Asia-Pacific region, with the Japanese brand displacing the European brands, including Ford came from England during the 1970s. Ford decided that if you can't beat them, then join them. The fifth generation Familia, first shown on the 2nd of June in 1980, was entirely new Mazda first front engine and front wheel drive subcompact car and was available as a hatchback and saloon. It was developed with input from Ford. At its introduction in 1980, it won the first Car of the Year Japan Award. The new Mazda E-Series engine, loosely based on the preceding DC series. The Ford Laser and Meteor is a restyle of the Mazda Familiar, or known as the 323 in the global market, the model produced by Mazda in Japan from 1980 onwards, and it was the first passenger car product other than trucks that the companies had shared the truck model earlier that Ford adapted, taking the then new Mazda 323 and making cosmetic change for visual differentiation. Technically, the cars were identical. If you look into the engine bay, many parts had Mazda branding on them. In Australia, the Ford Laser was known as the Ford Meteor, which had several technical differences that made it have different codes. Like the Mazda, the styling of the first generation Ford Laser is still very similar to the Mazda 323 Familia. The striking difference between the Ford Laser and Mazda Familia is in the front fascia, where the Ford Laser is slightly reminiscent of the European Ford Cortina and Escort. However, the Meteor's front styling and grille differed from the corresponding Laser. The Meteor had more of an egg-grade pattern than the plain black slate of Ford Laser. Initially, the Ford Laser was only available as a four-door saloon, because the Mazda Familia was also available in a hatchback variant. Ford finally followed suit by selling the Ford Laser hatchback version. This hatchback version is divided into 5-door or 3-door option. However, it seemed that the Laser sold in Indonesia only has a 5-door hatchback variant. The Ford Laser was only available as a 1.3-liter engine, derived from the Mazda E3 engine. The Mazda E3 engine was designed to be as light and compact as possible. Therefore, the engine is equipped with a timing chain, aluminum rocker arms and piston, a thin cylinder block, and single valve spring. To drive the front wheels, Ford equipped the Laser with a 4-speed manual transmission. The smaller 1.1-liter engine was never available in Australia. Later, the 1.5-liter version were added, eventually even a turbocharged version. In January 1983, the Laser underwent a facelift to becoming the KB. Light changes were made to the rear, while the front was redesigned in a more modern style, aligning it with Ford corporate look of the era. However, the Meteor pitch as a Ford Cortina replacement was merely a temporary measure prior to the introduction of the Telstar, a mid-sized saloon and hatchback in May 1983. In Australia, the Meteor directly competed against the Holden Camira. The trim level in Australia comprised the entry-level GL and upmarket Ghia, both available with an optional S-Pack that added full instrumentation and upgraded tires. Steel wheels with bright metal trim rings differentiate the GL from the Ghia, with its alloy wheels and deep side protection moldings. In Japan, referred to as the BE Laser, which was identical to the Australian KB series. The BE model code relates to the BD model code used for the corresponding Familia when on sale in Japan in late 1982. Fuel injection and a 113 horsepower turbocharged model were added in July 1983. Aside from being built in Australia and Japan, Lasers were also being assembled in New Zealand at Fort Wherry plant in Auckland, replacing the Mark II Escort. In New Zealand, the Laser was sold both as a hatchback and saloon, but the Meteor name not being used in that market, and was later joined by the Mazda 323 at the renamed Vehicle Assembler of New Zealand, or VANS, a joint venture between Ford New Zealand and Mazda. The new 323 initially had been assembled at the Motor Industry International plant in Otahuhu, subsequently taken over by the Mazda New Zealand. New Zealand-built Ford Laser hatchback and saloon was available with a 1.1, 1.3 and 1.5-liter engine respectively, with the Ghia having a 3-speed automatic transmission option. The Laser was also built at Mazda factory in Hiroshima, with complete knockdown kits sent to Malaysia, Zimbabwe and Indonesia in right-hand drive market, and in left-hand drive market for Taiwan and the Philippines. In Taiwan, it was assembled using complete knockdown kits from 1981 via the local joint venture Ford Leo. In addition, it was sold in markets in the Caribbean such as Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago, where it was locally assembled. The Laser was also sold in some countries in Latin America, including Argentina and Chile. This was identical to the KA version sold in Australia. In Mexico, however, the first generation Laser had a front end similar to the North American Mazda GLC. The Willow Valley Motors Industry, or VMI, was established in 1961 when the Ford Corporation of Canada imported a complete assembly plant to assemble Ford motor vehicle for the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. The Industrial Development Corporation, IDC, and not meaning I don't care, bought the company in 1967 for constructual assembly. The laser was introduced in Zimbabwe in 1981, the first Ford model to be sold in the country for over 14 years, after the imposition of sanctions on the then Rhodesia. After its unilateral declaration of independence, it was assembled at the state-owned Willow Valley Motor Industry plant in Harare alongside the Mazda 323. January 1985 saw the advent of the BF series laser in Japan. It was sold alongside the factory two-door cabriolet. This was the first major redesign. For the first time, a diesel version was offered in Japan. The second generation of the Ford Laser had a body code KC and KE and was sold between 1985 and 1989. All-wheel drive models for saloon and wagon or van were also available for sale. This added up to an extremely convoluted Japanese product line, which was later streamlined in 1987 with a midlife model refresh. For Australia, the range was known as the KC and GC series, launched in October 1985. All body style carried over, with the addition of station wagon badge as Meteor from 1986. A new TC3 variant, which was top-of-the-line laser model in specification and designated KC2, replaced the Sport variant from the KB series. For the first time, electronic fuel injection was available as an option on Ghia models and was standard on TC3 models. Buyers who ordered automatic transmission with this engine received an electronic control 4-speed unit. The 1.5-liter engine was standard on GL, Ghia, and TC3, though some early GL models were equipped with a 1.5-liter single overhead cam carburetor. The KC laser wagon was also assembled in New Zealand alongside its Mazda 323 equivalent until Ford closed their assembly plant in 1996. The second generation of the Ford Laser entered Indonesia with 3-body option. The most popular and widely circulated is a 4-door saloon, which is also into a taxi version. Later, a non-emission scrub Laser TX3 3-door hatchback with the non-emission fuel-injected B6 1.6-liter engine became available. Some Indonesian TX3 variants are equipped with a turbocharger capable of producing up to 140 horsepower. These cars are quite rare, especially the turbo 4-wheel drive variant, as they were previously used for rally racing. The production for general buyers in Indonesia was stopped in 1989, but the GL Saloon with carburetor engine was continued to be available for taxi fleet until 1997. The Australian government implemented called the Button Car Plan, also known as the Button Plan, where the Australian government intended to rationalise the Australian automotive industry and transition from loads of car models that are available to lower the number and to protect the market. Since the Ford Laser was sold alongside the Mazda 323, weirdly enough, according to a research carried out by Ford Australia in 1984, a third of the Laser buyers were unaware that the Ford model was based on the Mazda 323. In October 1987, Ford introduced a facelift of the KC series, the KE. There were a number of notable changes with the introduction of the KE. The Meteor name was dropped from the saloon and wagon body style, meaning they were now badged as Laser. Like the hatchback variant, the TX3 was fully imported from Japan, while all other models in the Laser range were manufactured locally in Sydney suburb of Flemington. The KE is easy to distinguish from the earlier model by different grille, headlight, taillight, body side molding, bonnet, front guard, and on some model, wheels.
The first wheel! Do you know what he transformed into? No. Nothing!
The dashboard and instrument cluster received new graphic, and the interior was available in slightly different color shade to the KC. In mid-1989, in preparation for a new Australian design rule to come effect in 1990, all models were fitted with a high-mount rear stop lamp as standard. The Ford Laser also entered the US and Canada market as the Mercury Tracer. It was available as a hatchback and wagon only. The Tracer, no, not that Tracer, Yablin. Hatchback shared its body shell with its Laser counterpart. US version of the Tracer were built in Mexico at the Ford Hermosillo stamping and assembly plant, whereas for the Canadian market, Ford opted to import the Mercury Tracer from Taiwan instead. In Bermuda, however, the KE Laser was sold locally in right-hand drive market, badged as a Ford. The South African Motor Corporation, more commonly known as Samcor, was a South African car manufacturer created in 1985 through the merger of Ford Motor Company of Canada, South African subsidiary, and Sigma Motor Corporation, previously known as AMCAR, which produced Mazda for the local market. As a result of the merger, Ford and Mazda began to share models in South Africa as they did already in other markets like Australia. In 1985, Samcor partnered with Mazda, and in 1991, Samcor released a rebadged version of the Mazda 323 called the Sau Panzer. The Sau was available in two models, a saloon and a hatchback, but later the hatchback was available with a 1.3-liter engine. There were virtually no difference in specification between the Mazda 323 and the Sau Panzer. The Sau Panzer initially was targeted at the UK market with the price starting at £7,000, less than a Ford Fiesta, but people preferred the Mazda BG Interplay with its new design in the same year in 1991. In fact, when the Sau Panzer was released, the Mazda 323 BF series was still being sold in the UK. People also preferred the Mazda 323, which had reliable after-sales service, over the Sau Panzer, even though they were essentially the same car. And to top it all, Sau was a complete unknown brand that had a tiny dealer network. Its closer competitor was probably the Proton, which also offered an all-Japanese design but with a wider range. So apart from patriotism by South Africans living in the UK, there was little reason to buy one. The Sau Panzer sold less than 1,000 units until 1993. The South African model of the Laser and Meteor also gained the 2-liter engine from 1991 to 1993. The latter was available for the flagship 2.0i RS. There was also a coupe utility version with the facelift Mazda 323 BF styling, sold as the Ford Bantam and Mazda Rustler. The third generation BG series of 1989 to 1994 went on to be the most popular Laser sold in Japan, with the new coupe and liftback version an instant success, with a turbo model with 4-wheel drive producing 178 horsepower. In Australia, this model was released in March 1990 as the KF series and updated in October 1991 with the KH facelift. Local production of the Laser in Australia ceased on the 4th of September 1994 when Ford closed its plant in Flemington and replaced it with the new KJ model, which was imported from Japan. In New Zealand, the Laser continued its production at Ford Assembly Plant in Wiri, Auckland until the end of 1996 when the factory closed. The extended production model in New Zealand was sold as a five-door hatchback form as either the Laser Encore or Laser Spirit as a cheaper alternative to the newer KJ Laser, which was imported from Japan. In Taiwan, the third generation Ford Laser was launched in May 1990 with the addition Chinese name Golden Laser. This generation of Laser was also sold in Cyprus and Malta and also was the basis of Laser Escort model sold in North America from 1990 for the 1991 model year. In United States, Chrysler already using the Laser name for the Plymouth Laser. The Escort name was retained for the new model due to both strong brand equity. In Indonesia, this generation was assembled locally and sold from 1990 to 1996. However, the public negative image of taxis also affected these two vehicles. In 1996, because the Indonesian government has a national car program called THEOTOWN, it was priced below its competitors and THEOTOWN sales dominated the market, but it hurt competitor sales and market share. The THEOTOWN was priced around 35 million rupiah, around $16,800 about the half price of its competitors in the same segment. By comparison, a similarly sized Toyota Corolla was priced around 70 million rupiah, around $33,600. By the end of the first half of 1997, Timor had captured 26% of the Indonesian car market. Ford and Chrysler withdrew their investment from Indonesia, feeling that their products would not be able to compete with the government-subsidized Timor. At that time, Ford had already assembled the Laser locally and planned to assemble the Ford Escort locally, while Chrysler planned to produce the Chrysler Neon. Meanwhile, General Motors, which had operated a plant in Indonesia, announced in June 1996 that it would postpone its investment plans. The fourth generation Laser was known as the PHA series in Japan as the emerging market of SUV and MPV comes. All sporting models were discontinued with the release of this model in the wake of poor sales and financial return as Mazda scaled back operation and sought to rearrange market focus. Only the saloon and three-door hatchback were sold in Japan, the hatch being based on the Mazda Familia Neo. The new Laser was introduced in 1994, an engine driveline improvement continuing up until the last of the KM series were released in 1999. The fourth generation Laser was the first Laser manufactured wholly in Japan, following Ford Australia's decision to close their Flemington plant. Released in Australia in May 1999, the KN Laser was the last generation of Laser to be introduced. The model range was almost identical to the Mazda 323 on which it was based. However, the Laser was disappointing in sales numbers mainly because the smaller Festiva and other cheaper South Korean cars from Hyundai, Ghia and Daewoo, to which many conservative buyers flocked. In Latin America, this generation of Laser was assembled in Colombia and Venezuela, alongside its Mazda 323 counterpart known as the Mazda Allegro. Fifth generation BJ series models were renamed to Laser Ghia, with popularity failing even further than the previous model. Japanese production ceased at the end of 2002 to be replaced by the imported Ford Focus, which was already sold there since 2000. In February 2001, the KN received a minor facelift and became the KQ Laser. The big news with the KQ Laser was the addition of a 2.0-liter 4-cylinder engine for the top spec SR2. In March 2002, due to failing sales, Ford made one last attempt to restore the Laser popularity to its former glory by announcing minor upgrades to the SR2 and added 3 new exterior colors to the range, being Gold Rush, Red Revenge and Electric Blue. Despite the Laser having a good reputation with buyers in marketplace and many attempts from Ford to reignite interest in the model, it was unable to sell in reasonable numbers. In September 2002, Ford decided to discontinue the Laser in Australia, replacing it with a European-sourced Ford Focus. However, the Laser continued in New Zealand until mid-2003, when it was also replaced by the facelift Focus. In Taiwan, Ford Lioho renamed the Laser Saloon as the Ford Tierra, while the Laser hatchback was renamed to the Ford Life. The fifth generation Laser were marketed in Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia as the Laser Lynx. The Laser was a project to replace the Escort, a pioneer project, a world car project also, but replaced in most markets around the world by the European-sourced Ford Focus, designated as one of Ford's world's car. The Mazda 323 replacement, the first generation Mazda 3, was also based on the same platform as the Focus, continuing the tradition of both companies having products in this market segment around the world, sharing componentry and continuing its legacy. That's it. See you later.